Good morning, sir.
Good morning, brother Rich. How you doing?
I'm doing as always better than I will ever deserve, my friend.
Nice, nice. Always glad to hear that. Always a good thing. What you been
Actually,
up
I
to?
didn't. Actually, I'm gonna tell the truth. I have not slept good in 2 nights, man. My hips are killing me for some reason.
Really?
Yeah,
Hmm.
nothing has changed. We got the same. We got a feather, like a feather topper on the bed, a memory foam bed, and normally
Mm-hmm.
I sleep well, but I sleep and have for Seeklander turned me onto this when he before he had hip surgery.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, makes my hips feel better to sleep with a pillow in between my legs
Mm-hmm.
on my side. So I've been doing that for probably 10 years and it is fantastic. Well, last 2 nights, man, my hips are killing me. You ever have that problem?
No, never have. Mine's my low back from all the sitting I do,
Really?
and
Ooh.
I've played the same game with the pillow in between there when it was bad.
Hmm.
For I'm very tight. Naturally, I'm not flexible.
Same.
So for me, chiropractic doesn't do any good because the tight muscles just pull everything out of alignment. But physical therapy was a game changer for me. I mean, in my 20s, I had to think about how to get out of bed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and now late 50s, I hop out of bed and everything. So yeah, I'm a big believer in physical therapy.
Hmm. Yeah. When I had I don't remember, first or second knee surgery, and the Navy doctor, she was checking my range of motion. She's like, "Wow, you're no yoga master, are you?" I'm like, "No." Like, yeah, you are. You're one of the tightest Marines I've ever seen. I'm like, well, thank you.
Yeah. So you mean like in the cheap way or in like the muscle way? I'm just
Both.
curious. Yeah. Okay. There you go. See all the above.
Yeah. We got Will Rhodes on. He is coin number
Ah.
2269 out of Missouri, and our good friend, Mr. Will Parker, coin number 800. We are putting together Warrior Camp. I know there's one folk on, but it's those that will listen. I'm working on it. If the folks from the two lodging locations I have will get back to me, we're going to plan on doing a Warrior Camp right now. The dates are looking like the first week of November this year, and Mr. Will Parker looks like will be teaching for us. Um,
Awesome.
yes, sir. So, what is this coin stuff? What is this number
Coin.
269? What is that all about?
That would be your American Warrior Society coin. Gets you access to the training vault. And let's see if we can take a list of things you get access to. You got the most important thing is the assessment. Start there. Figure out what you're lacking. Well, what could you be lacking? You could be lacking medical, which I think is often overlooked by folks. This is not the shiny new object from the pew pew store, right? So then do the assessment. Figure out your medical first because you can use the medical for things other than shooting type incidents, car accidents, something happens out there on your farm or on my property, right? Then you can start digging into the shiny objects, right? You can dig into BJJ, white belt, the blue belt, because a lot of even armed stuff is going to start with an entangled engagement. You can get into gun grappling. You can do pistol, rifle, shotgun, vehicle defense, home defense. There's a lot of articles in there yourself, Dr. Fuller. There's just a wealth of information in there.
Yeah, thank you, brother. It is. It's a place you can go to get the latest and greatest information out there. And I think your point about the medical is incredible because you live in a relatively rural setting. I do too. It's 30 minutes to get to the
Mhm.
hospital here, so that's a
Yep.
long time
Yep.
if you got an arterial spray. And
Absolutely.
and right
It's a
now
lifetime.
it is a lifetime, right? It
Yeah.
truly is. And
Yeah.
we we have a we're doing some construction on the farm right now, so there's a lot of machinery and stuff like that. Today I'll be making a lot of cuts on the table saw, and every time I'm around that thing, I'm like, "Where's the tourniquet set?"
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yep.
think I know what I'm doing, but the
Hey.
gentleman across the street,
Mhm.
man, him and my dad were cutting, and he's been a woodworker his entire life, and he almost cut his hand completely off a couple years ago, and he just never been a woodworker since. They had to reattach all the tendons
Mhm.
and bones and
Uh,
stuff. So it's dangerous, man.
yep.
We've
It
got,
is.
and who do we have teaching it? Dr. Dan Olesnicki, SWAT doctor, ER physician, teaches all the medical modules. We have world class wrestlers, fighters, shooters, teaching everything in there. Edge weapons masters. If you want to take a look at it, man, first 14 days is free. Click on the links at the top of today's show notes.
Yep. And you know, like you say, in the first 14 days is free without a credit card. So it's not a scam to get you get a credit card in there and hope you forget to hit the cancel button like a lot of places do. Um, you know, we had an incident out here. Like I say, I'm fairly rural, about 25 minutes to the nearest hospital, 20 minutes if I'm really getting after it.
Mhm.
And we had an incident out here. Some people walking around our property a couple winters ago, and of course I was gone. And you know, wife's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "We'll call cops. That's what we pay taxes for."
Mhm.
Well, it turned out they were looking for a lost dog. It
Mm.
turned out to be nothing. However, it was 32 minutes before they arrived.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it just depends where they are in the county, and you know, they could also just be driving by the county highway over here and be here in 4 minutes. You just don't know.
I'm reticent to talk about this, but I'm going to because of the nature of our show and the community we have. And I've been asking people this because uh, m- most of the police shooting videos are pretty easy, relative to Graham v. Connor, Tennessee
Mhm.
versus Gardner, all these uh, things that Supreme Court rulings that govern police use of force and the judgment of the officers are normally pretty good. I mean, you can have the outliers like the killing of Daniel Shaver, or how long the knee was on the neck of George Floyd. You can have these outliers that we can discuss ad nauseum. However, I'll give you the quick Cliff Notes version for those that are watching. Thank you, Mark Hamilton, Michael Gentili, and we have a quorum officially of Wills. So there was the call comes out. Will now
Mhm.
think about this because there's there's no this is no stump to chump. I don't know necessarily what the right answer is, which is why it's so fascinating to me. I think the police officer on the scene did a great job, but it's a very confusing situation. So here's what happened. Call goes out on the radio that there is a stranded motorist on the highway. So the highway patrol picks it up. He rolls up. It's a 2-lane highway surrounded by woods, and there's 2 lanes here and 2 lanes over there, and there's a giant concrete barrier separating the two. And when I say giant, I mean like at least 5 foot high.
Okay.
So the police officer, and it's not a motorist off the side of the road. He is stopped dead in the center of the fast lane in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
Cop rolls up on him, and the police officer starts walking up to the vehicle. No hand on the gun because not, this seems to be a stranded motorist.
Mhm.
He's like, "Hey, partner, let's go ahead and get you off the side of the road." And African American male jumps out of the car, starts shooting the police officer. Police officer gets shot 6 times. He's rolling around on the ground, trying to protect himself. The killer goes up to shoot him in the head, close range, and his gun jammed or he's out of rounds or something. As he's clearing the malfunction, the police officer draws his firearm from the supine position, fires 13 shots. All 13 hits the suspect.
Okay.
Fantastic shooting. Suspect falls down, appears to be dead. The police officer gets to his feet. He's checking himself out, and that's when backup arrives. Now, the question I'm going to ask you and our viewers that are watching this one, thank you to the 7 folks on, is what do you do? What are your priorities if you're the backup officer? Now, how the backup officer came there immediately at the stop of the shooting, I don't know. I guess it's
Mhm.
just luck, right? But he's there on the scene because the police officer that's been shot 6 times, his radio went flying, everything went flying
Mhm.
during the shooting. So he gets to his feet and his backup's like, "Are you shot, brother?" He's like, "I'm leaking all over, man." He's like,
Mhm.
"Where at?" He was like, I don't know, man. My legs, my arms, I'm shot. So he gets on the radio. Police officer's been shot. He sees the guy laying dead in the road, or presumably dead. He asks the officer who's been shot, "Have you cleared that car?" He says, "No." Now I will throw it over to you or anyone else in the comments. What are your next priorities?
Clear the car because you don't know if there's another threat that's going to come out and injure or kill, incapacitate or kill the second responding officer, and therefore neither one of them, no one gets any aid then. And
Mhm.
that assuming the car is empty since nobody's come out of there. So that's an assumption on my part right now. Assuming that car is empty, that's going to take all of 6, 10 seconds, maybe.
Mhm.
And then I was thinking about who, I don't know of any legal part on this. So this is me supposing.
Mhm.
of course, as a responding officer, I want to help my fellow officer first, but I was thinking, okay, what's the it's also who instigated the fight. Now, the second officer responding doesn't, they can make an assumption, right? But you
Mhm.
don't really know. So I was thinking, well, what if I was in a gas station parking lot and watched two people arguing,
Mhm.
and person A starts shooting person B, and person B shoots back, and they're both down? Well, I'm going to help the initial victim first. That's where my heart's going to go.
Mhm.
So I'm going to say clear the car, help the other officer, and then help the aggressor.
Okay. So remember, you're in the middle of nowhere. You've got an officer who's been shot 6 times. He's leaking out everything. I think you're right that the car is a potential threat. He did ask the backup officer did ask the officer who's been shot. Not only did you clear the car, but did anybody come out of it running? Because they're
Okay.
he's looking at the woods around him like, oh
Right.
crap.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, nobody came out of the car that I saw. He's like, okay. So the responding officer is afraid to take his eyes off that car. So he's got his gun drawn. Meanwhile, behind him, the officer that's been shot 6 times has tourniqueted himself um, on the leg and on the arm from the arterial spray. Now, you didn't say get on the radio and get EMS because remember, he doesn't have a radio. So we need to get EMS rolling. And the second thing I would say is, and again, I throw it out here. Donald Green says, take a moment to ensure the bad guy is no longer a threat. Clear the car simultaneously. Call for more help. Again, helping injured officer. Yeah, solid. I mean, again, this isn't stump the chump because to me, you've got a lot of problems, right? I would be, yes, I have a dead guy in the road. There's an unsecured firearm in the road. There's an unsecured car in the road. And I have my officer buddy is bleeding out behind me. And they're in the middle of nowhere. So I'm going to call and say, how long is get EMS there now? I want a status report. How far are they out? And if they say they're 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'm rolling. Okay. But think about what I'm rolling means because I have a priority of life. Priority of life is this officer has a golden moment here to survive or not.
Yep.
And I have a car equipped with emergency equipment I can get. But here again, if you leave the scene unsecured, you left a car in the middle of the roadway. Now you can lock up the trooper's car and he's got lights and hopefully it'll let people know, but I don't know the terrain. If it's rut, you come over a hill and there they are.
Yeah.
So there's so many variables to this one. Do you run up, grab the gun off the ground, check the pulse on the dead guy, clear the car quickly visually, throw your buddy in the cruiser? Now, what happened was, Will, and thank you to the 8 folks watching, EMS was like 3 minutes away. So there's no help by getting the hell out of there. So he was able to, okay, I'm going to keep my eyes on the car till more people arrive, because if I go up and secure the car and I got to take a shotgun round to the face, nobody's helped, right?
Yep.
So I thought, man, what a lot of variables here, because it's not like it would be an easy call, I think, if the car was off the road, but because it's smack dab in the middle of are you going to cause a bunch of traffic collisions to get people killed? I don't know. It was an interesting one for what are your priorities, because you have seconds to make an assessment and take action.
Absolutely. And it goes to show any dynamic situation like that, there's so many variables, so many things to consider. That as crazy as it sounds, in a situation like that, slow down.
Yes.
Right. Take a breath. And take a breath and really take in some information and then make the best decision you can.
With the priorities of what's important. And that's why I say, I think for a police officer, everybody gets wrapped up in, agility and all this. You want that. But more than that, I think you want mature, reasonable judgment.
Yes.
Logical decisions based on a priority and hierarchy of needs. I can't save dead guy on the ground. I can save this officer. But if I throw him in my car and we take off, am I endangering the public by leaving this thing here? What do I do? Because these rural communities, it probably as much as anybody, and most of our folks watching this morning, they probably live in a rural community, I would imagine. And, back, there might be a county of tens of thousands of square miles with no other officer on duty.
Mhm.
Seeklander and I trained a agency in Montana one time, and he's like, our nearest backup is 70 something miles away. I have one officer on duty at any time. Can I deputize you guys while you're here? And literally gave me a patrol car.
Wow.
So I'm like, yeah. And that's the kind of problem these communities have. So when you see something like that, that guy's brain has to be going, I thought I was going to roll up on a stranded motorist and help somebody get
Yeah.
out of the road.
Yeah, probably some drunk guy that stopped and passed out and,
And
middle of the
now
night, right?
here we are
Yep.
fighting for our lives. So
Yep. Yeah, it goes from 0 to 1,000,000 miles an hour real fast.
yeah.
And there's all the startle factors that go within that. Not only the initial responding officer, but even the second one, because he rolled up with no information, right?
Mhm.
So you go from I'm going to go help Jim out to, oh boy.
Yeah. And he was, the officer did survive. He was 3 rounds in the vest.
Okay.
So he was probably taking a lot of body trauma and felt, I can't imagine how
Right.
awful that feels to get shot in soft body armor. And then he had hits to his legs and arms. But that's another thing. I'm going to now circle back and then I'll shut the hell up and we'll get on with today's shows because we got
This
a
is a great lesson.
fantastic show about the Melt Up series. This is going to be part 2. But when we think of injuries, like if that had been you or I that don't run around in soft body armor, we're going to take 3 to the chest.
Mhm.
We're going to need chest seals, not just
Mhm.
tourniquets.
Right.
Police officers and military guys are being saved by tourniquets because they wear body armor. But I think a lot of times in our medical response, we don't always think of having a lot of chest seals in our bag.
Yep.
Because that's what you're going to need.
And that's a great point. And the reading I've done on it, the tourniquet craze, if you want to call it that, started with the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, because there were a lot of IEDs and those guys are wearing hard body armor, right? So it's
Yep.
more extremity injuries. But if a bad guy's going to go into a place, it's not going to be like, hey, hold your arm out, right? That's going
Right.
to be a miss, basically, right? Because they're not aiming at your arms or legs; they're aiming at center mass. So that I think that's an excellent point. It's something I added to my bag, a number of years ago after, reading an article that was critical of the tourniquet craze, as in tourniquets, solve everything. And it's certainly not the case, but we all fall into that because you see whether it's an officer or a really committed person with wearing a tourniquet, somewhere on them as they're going about their daily life.
Yeah, they're awesome. I don't think you or I don't want to confuse anybody. We're not saying tourniquets are not the cat's meow. They're great. However, if you were to take those 3 hits to the torso and you got 3 exit wounds with them, let me do the math for you. That's 3 times front and back. You need 6 chest seals for that.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, who carries 6 chest seals? I don't. I probably should, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah,
something to think about. Anyway.
Yeah, it really is, and it's where it's easy to go down the what if rabbit hole, right? And that's something that anybody who watches this later, it's like start somewhere.
Right.
Start with 2 chest seals. Whether
Yes.
if it's a budgetary thing or and for the way I've got my bag set up, there's we're a family of 5, so there's a bag in each vehicle that will cover 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly I'm looking at 30 chest seals. That'll put a hit on the budget, right?
Oh,
so but start somewhere. Have a couple and know how to do an improvised one, and start somewhere.
Yeah, when I joined the Marine Corps, we didn't have dedicated chest seals in our kit. It was just, I'm going to teach you how to make an improvised one and hope for the best. But now they have all that stuff.
So yeah, y'all be careful out there.
Amen.
So, and you never know what you're gonna come up on as Joe Civilian either, right? I mean, it's the stranded motorist. You call 911 and go about your life unless you're inclined to stop and see what's going on. But be aware of the risk you're taking on as well.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of in my just to take this one final step further. I was telling this to my brother. He's in the academy right now to be a probation officer. Don't ask me what he's thinking. That's That's a whole nother conversation. We have to ask Jeff about that. But it's like, okay, whatever. So I was talking to Jeff when he got in Friday night about this dilemma. And I said, what would you do? And he said, that sounds a lot like the one that happened in Blount County, Tennessee, where I used to be a police officer in Maryville City inside of Blount County. The female officer's trying to get this intoxicated motorist out of the car. He won't get out. The backup officer's a big old corn-fed guy, and he starts, get the hell out of that car, boy. And he shoots and kills him like that. He falls back, I mean, stone dead. And then she gets shot as well. She was the primary officer. And he takes off. I think he ran over the backup officer that he already killed. Anyway, it's all caught on camera. The concerned citizens roll up, and she's like, oh, my God, check my partner, check my partner. They're like, he's dead, ma'am. We got to get you out of here. They leave the officer dead in the grass, throw her in the back of a pickup, and take her to the hospital. Meanwhile, leaving a scene. So, and Jeff's like, isn't it like that? I'm like, no, because civilians don't know policies and protocols. We're just trying to save somebody's life.
Yeah.
But you, in that scenario we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, you do know those, and you have to make a decision. Anyway, all right.
Yep. The other way I put it to my cop buddies is, a dedicated civilian on scene is your best tool, because I'm not encumbered by your policies and procedures.
Bingo.
Yeah. So, all right. Great lesson, brother. I'm glad you brought it up, because it's always good to, go through those. And, in aviation, we say that the gift they've left behind for us is a chance to learn these lessons, right? Because now you or I come upon a situation like that is just, Joe Nobody. It's like, okay, hey, I remember having a talk about this. And it's funny how that stuff comes back to you in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So let's get into today's show, the Melt Up series, part 2, the downturn.
Yes. And I think, I saw Mark's on here. Mark Riddell last week brought up Basel 3. That's at the end, brother. So I'm going to make you wait with bated breath until the very end. We're going to dig a little bit into Basel 3. So, and spoiler, eventually there'll be a Basel 4. We'll get into the why here at that point. So the Melt Up series, episode 2, the downturn. So stump the chump question, brother. Will there be a economic downturn at some point?
Absolutely.
There you go. Okay. So we don't know when, where, why, how, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're talking about an overall scenario in this series, not saying we know when it's going to happen. So we'll start off with our standard.
Haven't you accurately predicted 7 of the last 20 downturns?
I think it's 11 of the last 2.
Okay.
So, and I just saw there's one of the many people I follow on YouTube on the finance side, and this guy bills himself as a stock guy, but he's a risk manager, and I think any good financial advisor is a risk advisor. Let's look at what are the risks out there, what could happen, kind of like we do for self-defense, right? I mean, it's the old don't go down the dark alley. That's the best defense, right? Well, if we want our money to grow, we kind of have to go down the dark alley. We got to get it out there and get it working for us. So we always need to be looking at these risks and contemplating what we'll do if these risks come along. Well, that can also make a person look pretty paranoid. Well, this could happen or that could happen. Well, that doesn't mean you or I or anybody else is saying don't ever be in the stock market or don't ever, be invested in, take your pick, real estate, Bitcoin, gold, whatever it might be, but be aware of the threats that are out there and get how much you have invested in these things correctly sized for your risk tolerance.
That's the big one. What is your risk tolerance? And you and I are on different risk tolerances.
Yes.
Yep. You know what I mean? We just are.
If it doesn't get my heart rate up, I'm bored.
Yeah. Not me. If it gets my heart rate up, I'll run from it.
Well, and there's a great line. I just heard this last weekend while I was watching stuff. Said it's the sleep at night, factor, right? Mm-hmm. And if something's causing you to not sleep, keep selling more of it until you sleep. Yeah. Right? Which is why, crypto, Bitcoin, for me, it's a small portion of the portfolio. Because if, let's just make up some numbers here. Let's say it's 5% of your portfolio and it goes down 10%. Well, that's half a point on your overall portfolio.
Mhm.
Big deal.
But
Right.
if you're all in, you're going to have a heart attack.
Exactly right. So, so that position sizing is and stability, volatility, if you will, is a huge portion of this. It's the psychology of everything, right?
Mhm.
If you look at raw numbers and took the volatility out, all of us would be 100% in Bitcoin. It's
I
crushed
think
everything
so.
over the last 20 years. Yeah, absolutely. Look at the numbers for it. It's crushed everything.
Yeah, and if we
But
were
it's
a Dutch, you know what? If we were a Dutch merchant in the 1700s, we'd say, yeah, if we were smart, we'd be all in tulips.
yep, true.
You know,
But the tulips didn't have a 20-year run, though, in fairness.
you sure?
20 years of history. I'm not sure how long the tulip mania lasted, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't 20 years.
Okay, I'm going to dig
I'm
into that.
pretty sure. Yeah, do. And I stand by to be correct. I've never looked at the timeline.
Here's my
On it,
problem
but
with Bitcoin. Bitcoin
mhm,
was sold as, and again, I go read the Bitcoin Standard. It's a
mhm.
fantastic book. I've done my homework on it. I own not a single Satoshi of Bitcoin. Because I think it was told as this is DeFi, decentralized
Mhm.
currency. This is something that's going to revolutionary. And now you cannot use it for that because it's too volatile. Okay, well, so I can never buy a Starbucks. No, because it's doing this all day. You
Mhm.
know, you might went in and I bought this at Lowe's, a
Mhm.
little thing. And by the time I get in my truck, oh my God, I spent $150 on this instead of
Mhm.
15. It's just so
Yep.
okay. So what is Bitcoin? Well, it's more like a commodity of what? It's a commodity of what? And when the mania crashes, that's exactly what they're going to be saying. What was that thing a commodity of?
Mhm.
And everybody's going to say, I don't know. I thought you knew. We made a lot of money on the way up. We're going to lose a lot of money on the way down.
And I would throw out there on the counterpoint for that is the system has ruined Bitcoin
Mm,
because now you can buy futures on it. I buy ETFs of it now. I buy leveraged ETFs of it. So there's people out there trading options on it.
oh God.
And that so when it got brought within the system, that took it away from the original thing. Where in your but your I think your um the what you just described for the purchases with Bitcoin isn't the way it's now. Maybe it's the way it was originally intended.
That's what I'm
What
saying. It was
right,
sold to us as that. It is
right.
not that. It can never be that. So what
The
is
Well, the for the daily transactions, what they're really looking at is stable coins. And that's the Fed coin, which is a CBDC, which is a different animal. But there's plenty of other stable coins out there that are just basically attached to the value of the dollar. Where
which
the
is a snooze
real
fest. So you're really going to make money on that?
No, you're not going to make anything on that. But that would be your daily. Same way you're not going to make money holding cash, right?
Mhm.
But you can invest your money into other things that increase your wealth and then use the cash for your daily transactions.
I mean, Bitcoin last fall, I think it was around 40,000. I never thought it would go over 100. It's over 100.
Mhm.
It could be over 1,000,000 here in a year. And who
Yep.
knows what the top end is, but I'm telling you, eventually the ether's going to wear off and people are going, what the hell is, what is
Well,
this thing?
and I'll firmly affix my tinfoil hat. I think the U.S. government's getting exactly what they wanted out of Bitcoin, which
Mhm,
is they're getting rid of it because it became a threat. And the
mhm.
um where Bitcoin or I'll say a crypto really shines versus the current system is the quickness of it. You and
Mm,
I could do a transaction with a crypto, pick whichever one you want, over our phones on an app and transfer literally billions of dollars that way.
sure.
But if you want to run that through a Swift system, oh, there's some downfalls of that if you run afoul of the US government, right?
Yeah.
It takes time. There's banking fees. God help you if you want to do it on Saturday or Sunday, right?
Yeah.
That's the in my opinion, that's the future of crypto is
When
the
when this when this thing crashes, the one thing we'll say we got out of is blockchain
Mhm.
technology. And we'll be happy we got blockchain. And a lot of people are going to lose money. And I hope the government doesn't backstop a single damn one of them. If you lose your ass 5 days, 5 years from now on Bitcoin, then you go back to look at this thing because I was about to go all in with both feet. And the more I
I'm
looked
sorry,
at it,
go
the more
on with what?
with what?
You said you're going to go all in with
Oh,
what was it?
Bitcoin or
Oh
or
yeah.
any other, you know, I
Hmm.
was looking at Cardano, Ethereum, Ocean Protocol. There's,
Hmm.
you know, at the time there was just a dozen of them out there. Now there's thousands and thousands of
Yeah,
cryptocurrencies, which just makes it even more ridiculous.
it does.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know, but anyway.
What I've learned over the last say 6 months to 2 years,
Mhm.
slowly hammering me over the head, Bitcoin has become a market wide risk indicator. When people are risk on, which means they're speculating a little bit more, Bitcoin
Mhm.
does really well. When things look uncertain, people sell their Bitcoin because they're scared of the volatility.
Mm.
And so that's become a proxy for the risk tolerance of the market is the best way I've learned to use it of late. And that's the way I play it. I play it with a leveraged ETF. It's a 2x long leverage is BITX, hashtag not financial advice. And I play
Mhm.
it back and forth. So, you know, it's a trading vehicle for me at this point.
I mean, this I just I don't know what it is. You know, I mean, I know what it is, but at the same time, I don't know what the value of it is.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of energy tied up in the creation and maintenance of cryptocurrency, which is a drain, and a drain
Hmm.
for what? Who knows what the hell it is? I think the idea that Satoshi Nakamoto or whatever his name was that come up with it, whoever he was, nobody still knows who the guy was that wrote the
Hmm.
paper on it. It's an interesting thing,
Hmm.
but would I ever put money into it? You mentioned something a second ago about it, and to me, it's just another synthetic CDO. When you say it's an ETF of Bitcoin, it's an option relative to this, and it's a
Hmm.
put on that. I'm like, what? It, you know, doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense to me.
For me, it's just a way to trade the market and make the move on it.
Yeah. Michael
So
says, always thought its foundation was similar to tulips. Yeah, there you go. And Mark says, thank you. Position sizing is a great point. All my friends have Bitcoin. I'm still researching it. I'd love to hear Will's insights. You're way ahead of Australian investors. Will is a genius on this stuff. And depending on your risk tolerance, you know, if you're a conservative risk tolerance guy, it's the guy in the yellow shirt.
what
if
are
you
you, yellow?
if you've slept your last, if you say, oh, hey man, I don't want to sleep anymore. I want to get some
Yeah.
more gray hair. There you go.
And I've been there, and it's not fun.
No.
Yeah, it's I've been caught on the wrong side of the stuff, and gotten better at it, and that's it's like anything. It's how you learn. You make some
Yeah.
mistakes, and I made a couple of doozies in there. So, but you learn, you come back, you get better. You learn to be more prudent with stuff, in my opinion, and my experience personally.
Yeah.
Um, and that that flows across all sorts of things, and the great part is we get to pass it on to the kids. Thankfully they will listen better than I ever did, I hope. So all right, dig back into it here, brother.
I think greed
So
is driving the market, brother.
greed is driving the market. I looked this morning, it's either at 70 or something like that here before the market opens. At some point when we get into the possible threats out there, I want to talk about Moody's downgrading our debt, because that happened last Friday.
Hmm.
We'll dig into that then. I don't want to go off on a squirrel moment. You will notice here, though, if we look back over the last couple of years, anytime the market gets up into this, I'll say 70 plus on the fear greed index, it's getting ready to turn back. And we're going to talk later on in the threats, economic threats, into this volatility of the fear greed index, which is pretty darn good. They look at, I believe it's 6 different factors inside the market to see if fear or greed are running the market. Because there's only two things that ever run any market are fear and greed. Human emotions run everything in the end.
Yep.
And we're weird critters. Okay.
Yes, we are.
So we already answered this earlier. Is there gonna be a downturn at some point? Yes. End of story. That's it.
But this is
Okay.
this is the thing. You know, what's the causal factor?
Well, and the thing is, we don't know. And I'm
Could it be
not
all
sitting
those
here, right? And I'm not sitting here trying to be Nostradamus with this stuff, but these are the things that I'm looking at. And
things?
these things will, as we say, happen slowly and then all at once, right?
Mhm.
So if you got something or anybody else has something to throw in on this stuff, I'm not saying like we'll take the first one here. The job market's turning over. It's slowly happening right now. If you look at the JOLTS data, which is job openings and labor turnover survey, people aren't quitting jobs like they used to because you can't go there for a while. You'll remember somebody quit a job, they get a higher paying job like every time because we had such a labor shortage post COVID. It's not happening anymore, right? So the job market is slowly turning over. Is there a number out there? When unemployment reaches X percent or X point X percent, that's it. No, there isn't because it's all relative to other stuff. Now, we do know that Jerome Powell has alluded to that what he's really looking at now is not inflation. He's looking at the job market. And I don't know if you recall this, brother, if we ever talked about, you remember FAIT, FAIT?
I don't think so.
Okay. Flexible average inflation targeting came in back in post housing crisis, 2012, 2013. They started talking about FAIT. And when it was at the time, inflation was running too low. And they wanted to get that inflation up. So they were going to keep printing money until they got inflation up. And that's what they did. And they said, well, we're probably going to let it run a little above 2% for a while because we're going to look at this flexible average inflation target. So we want a 2% over a longer period of time. Well, it turned out it was a bunch of fugazi because Powell later came out and said, yeah, we were just printing money until something happened. Okay. Well, now literally he's talking about flexible average inflation target again, except this time inflation is too high. And I think what they're doing is they're saying we can't get inflation down with the other things that are going on, whether it be tariffs, supply chains, geopolitical stuff between us and China for the most part, as it affects the markets. So what he's really looking at here is the job market. And if unemployment starts going up, I think he's going to cut rates, even if inflation is still above 2%. Because you remember the Fed's got the dual mandate, right? Well, sometimes you got to pick one because if inflation's stuck above 2% and the job market starts turning over, well, now what? One's got to give, or you got to sit back and deal with pain in both of them, which is stagflation, which they don't want either. So
we talked about that. Those unemployment numbers are misleading.
They are. Usually what's reported out there is U3. There's U1 through U6. U6 is long-term unemployment. Without rehashing everything about the unemployment numbers, U3 is what they look at as people unemployed up to 6 months. Once you go past 6 months, it falls off that. So, we'll watch this and see what happens. There's a lot of leading data, like the JOLT survey, things like that give us hints where the job market's going. And spoiler alert, it's not good. Okay. So J-Dog, he's got to react to something at some point. And the market is expecting rate cuts to start in September, 1, maybe 2 this year. And each cut is a quarter point in their language. Well, how do you justify cutting rates when inflation's running 2.5% ish when they say their target is 2 and we haven't gotten back to the target? Or maybe he wants to go down in his last few months as, the start of Volcker 2.0. I don't know. We'll see. All right.
Let me welcome Greg on the show. Good morning, brother. Semper Fi. He says, good morning from New England American Wear Society, coin number 1928. I believe I saw you training some IDF soldiers recently, brother. Semper Fi, man.
Awesome. So you got the BNPL, buy now, pay later. And I say crisis in quotes there because it's not in crisis at this point. But could it move towards that? Yeah, I think it could really easily, especially if number one here, the job market turns over. Because there's people using buy now, pay later, which is a completely unregulated loan program out there that is free to get your Affirm or your Klarna 4 payments, 0% interest. But you miss one of those, it's brutal.
Well, again, we talked about this weeks ago. Buy now, pay later to buy a dozen eggs. Buy now, pay later to DoorDash from Applebee's. Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah. Yep. And that's what people are using it for. And people don't do that when they're in a good financial position, right? I mean, who would do that, right? and you see it all over the place. Anytime you see, excuse me, anytime you see, you know, make 4 easy payments. You can see it on Amazon. And I'm a car guy. I was on Blueprint Engines last night looking at stuff. They have it. Okay. You can see it everywhere. And once you start looking for it, it's just like looking for the yellow car. You will see it everywhere, and people are using it. Walmart's actually bringing it in house because it's such a cash cow. So,
not to.
What's that?
It'd be stupid not to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have Walmart stock, so I want them to. Hashtag not financial advice. So credit card balance is at an all-time high. So this one, I mean, you can look at the raw number of it, but even if you adjust it for inflation, because with inflation, every year, let's just say inflation stayed at a stable 2%, well, your total credit card balances would go up every year if people just kept it at the same relative level. So there's a little caveat there to credit card balances being at all-time highs because it kind of makes sense with the inflation we saw, right? Mm-hmm. So, but even if you adjust for inflation, it's gone up. The credit card balances have gone up faster than inflation. What's Ted have to say there?
Ted says Federal Reserve is a tight box. Doge and tariffs add in congressional lack of defined path. Must be pressured to hold rates as long as possible. Trump already beating on Powell.
Let's dig into that. If you can bring that comment back up, because there's some meat in there. So you've got Doge and tariffs, and this is later on in our list, but we'll jump to it now. The government is government spending is 25% of GDP. So now suddenly, let's just say you take half that away. Okay, it's not going to happen. Let's just do easy math. Take half of that away. Well, you've taken away 12.5% of GDP. That's a huge hit. Heck, take away 10% of that, 2.5% of GDP, right? So if Doge was really as effective as the blue media machine makes it to be, we're looking at a depression. That's not going to happen. Plus the spending cuts they talk about.
Why is it not going to happen? Well,
I don't think, I mean, it's what, 60, 70% of 60%, I'll say conservatively, of government spending is entitlements, Social Security, Medicare. Right. Basically, I'm all for the Doge stuff. Don't get me wrong about that part. But for the most part, it's a rounding error. Yeah. Sending, Viagra to the monkeys in Peru and then studying the effects of it, for $30 million. Yeah, it's a lot of money. I'd rather see that money go to veterans or fill in the blank here at home, of course. But let's face it, $30 million on a, $6 trillion budget or whatever it is, it's nothing. Right. It makes for a good news conference and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, it's not really going to make that much difference. You know what I'm saying? And I hate to sound that callous about it, but it's just numbers.
You're right. But the left is going to beat up on Doge. Oh my God, he's firing thousands of NOAA scientists, and he just is because they don't believe in science and climate change, and it's an anti-intellectual movement. And I'm like, how many scientists do you need? I mean, seriously, you tell me the number. What is the number?
I don't
know. It's a bunch of fear-mongering crap. I don't know.
It is. Oh, there's definitely the fear-mongering coming out of the left on it, and in fairness, a lot of the right thinks it's going to right all the wrongs in our budget. It's like, no, it's not, because when your top 4 things are Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, and the Department of Defense, and those, they're going after the Department of Defense on some stuff, but then rightfully they're repurposing a lot of that money into more effective things. Right. If you're not going to touch the top 4, it's really not going to make that much of a difference.
You're absolutely right.
It's the math. It's just sad, but it is. Okay. Also, later on, we're going to talk about some stimmy stuff within this. But, about half the stimmy-ish during COVID went to debt reduction. And credit card balances went way down. Well, that's basically been filled back up now on the credit card balances. So this is going to, squeeze people. People are getting squeezed on all these. So if you look at the, job market turning over, well, even if a person doesn't lose their job, they can lose confidence because somebody else lost their job, or now I can't just go get another job. So you don't feel as, risk taking, right? You don't feel as confident. because if something happens with my job at, XYZ company, I can't run over to DEF on Monday and have a job. Well, maybe we should pull back a little bit, right? So these are the things that affect people's emotions, and those emotions affect behavior.
Yes.
Right. And then that turns up in economic numbers. It takes a long time for all this to happen. And the same way it took a long time for people to get confident again, say after the housing crisis, it takes a long time when things turn over the other way. All right. Tariff fallout. We'll see which way it goes. I'm confident. I think you share the confidence in that, Trump's just using this as a negotiating tool.
Yep.
Is to force people to the table. I mean, if we would have said, "Oh, please, Mr. Xi Jinping, please come to the table and negotiate with us to make a more fair trade arrangement," A, it probably never would have happened. B, it would have taken at least decades. Now it's taken a month, 6 weeks, whatever it's been. Okay, so this is a big part of his negotiating tactics. But this is bringing volatility. And we talked about what volatility does to people's confidence.
It reminds me of Teddy Roosevelt's kind of gunboat diplomacy. It's just a more business-like approach and less bellicose version of that, probably.
Yeah.
And Don is on. So it's better late than never, I guess. Don, we're glad to have you. He says, howdy from Big Sky Country 2270.
Good to see you, brother. Trade war. Could this devolve into a full-out trade war? I don't think so. But we can see, little snippets here and there, refusing to ship certain things, rare earth minerals, China refuses to send those to us. That has downline effects, specifically for EVs and, military machinery. As far as EV goes, I prefer my cars at least 40 years old. So, it doesn't really affect them. Kinetic war. Russia, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, China, India, China, Taiwan.
Now, we got kinetic wars all over the place. Don't misunderstand what we're saying. We're talking about peer-to-peer kind of stuff here.
Yeah, exactly. Something that really disrupts the world, not just a part of the world. Yeah. That's the level we're talking about here. Yeah. Okay. Doge fallout. We touched on that. Less government spending equals lower GDP. Period. Dot. End. All there is to it. Save this one for last. Student debt crisis. This is one I'm keeping a closer eye on this one than anything else. Gal, the answer to your question is no.
You can
Can we really trust China? No.
Not even a little bit.
You've got A, B, or C. There are no, and all the above. So student debt crisis. This is probably the one I'm keeping the closest eye on because the consumer has been holding up our economy. It's 70% of the economy, as we've talked about. And the part of the consumer that's been holding the economy up is the higher income earners. And as backward as it sounds, the higher income earners typically have higher student loan debts too, because the doctors, lawyers, dentists, fill in the blanks, right? Well, when they didn't have to make those student loan payments, many of them just went out and spent it month after month after month. Well, that's coming to a brutal and fast end, right? Well, this is going to affect these things. And now they're coming back with, the interest rate on these debts is no joke, So this is the one, this is the sector that's going to be most affected by this restarting of the student loan payments. And they're the ones that have been propping up the economy. And a lady by the name of Anna Wong, there's some good interviews out there with her. She's with Bloomberg talking about this specific thing. And she brings up the point that the banks aren't properly, they don't really know where people are that are in this situation we just described because they can't see through that. There's no numbers for them. Their credit score is just fine. Their income is great. Their income to debt service is just great. But the consumer knows this payment's coming back. The bank doesn't necessarily know that. So is the bank able, if that person goes to get a loan for something, can the bank see that? Can the bank properly price that risk with that new debt? And her answer for that is no, they cannot.
Uh-huh.
So, so this is something that could start as like, whatever, no big deal. You got, yeah, it's ticking up a little bit. I think this is the one that could take off, and it doesn't, like we were talking about, before. It doesn't go away.
No, and
You
I think
literally
there's a
have to
tipping-
die.
There's a tipping point in there at some point.
Mm-hmm.
With that X percentage of those that hold a student loan debt decide not to pay it or can't make the payments.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Bad.
Bad.
Yep. That looks bad. So
Kyle says, I have more reasons to not trust China. I guess you all know the answer. My friend. Kyle
yes,
is
you do, sir.
right off the coast of that. And what does Don say?
It says credit scores are taking a huge hit for student loan borrowers as their payments now come due. Yes. So these things are going to hit, and let's take a moment to look at that. A lower credit score on that, that affects everything across the board. You go get another loan, you're going to pay a higher interest rate, assuming you get the loan, which in most cases you really do. It's just you may not be crazy about the terms.
Right.
You can almost always find a bank to lend you money. Just the terms are not going to be favorable because they're going to price that risk. Right. So I'm not sure how quick this is going to come through. Right now, we'll start to see what Don brought up. But for the last, 4 years, right? Have banks been able to properly price that risk in there with that? And the banks were clamoring to get the loans out there. So we'll see how this shakes out. It's going to be interesting. This one comes to us from
can we talk about something you brought up last week, which I thought was
Please.
fantastic. Not fantastic in a good way, but it's like it made me think if Powell does try to inject money, because it was one of the things that, like, oh, we're sliding down, I'll just throw more money out there. But banks look at the risk and they go, I'm not making these loans. These people are doing everything. Then banks can't get rid of it. The infusion that they're trying to do doesn't work. And then they go to the stock market, and then it just creates this huge problem.
Yes. Let's dig into that a little bit more. There's a chart towards the end where it's a full page chart. We're going to dig into it then.
Okay, perfect.
What's Ted have to say there?
When Will showed student loans were 1.2 trillion accounts payable on Treasury balance sheets, that got my attention.
Yep. So this is part of the budget for the U.S. government too, guys. So if suddenly, to your point, let's just say tomorrow, everybody says, I'm not paying my student loans anymore. Well, that's a hit to the income to the U.S. government.
That's why I say there's a tipping point. I don't know if it's 8%, 12%, 30%. There's something. I hope somebody knows what it is and are watching it very closely.
Right. But see, so here's what Ted was alluding to. And my point is, when, let's just say tomorrow, everybody says we're not paying it anymore. Well, now the federal government doesn't get that revenue that they're counting on each month, which means they have to go borrow more. Right. Yep. Which, if you have to go borrow more, you, me, anybody else, if we go borrow more, our credit score goes down. Right. And Moody's just downgraded our credit rating last Friday. We're going to get into that too.
More to come on that one, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So this comes to us from the New York Fed. So it's not leftwing.com or rightwing.com. Percent of balance, 90 plus days delinquent by loan type. All right. So it goes all the way back to 2003. And this is a quarter by quarter chart. And we can see we expect it to come up 2008, 2009, and then settle back down. I want to focus in on the red line here first. That's your student loan debt. And unsurprisingly, starting in 2012, the delinquencies started going up. People were squeezed from the after effects of the housing crisis. But then you notice it went pretty stable there at about, I call it 12%, 11% until 2020, when you suddenly didn't have to make any payments. And when there were no payments, there was no delinquency. So it went pretty much to zero. And now it went full hockey stick because Trump's saying, you got to start paying it again. Okay. So this is people getting squeezed, but let's look at every line here. Blue one's your credit card. What's that been doing since first quarter of 2023?
Going up, brother.
Going up. It's 50% up? All right. The green one here, auto loans, same thing, about the same time period as the credit cards. And we know what car prices did. It's been crazy. And then now people are stuck. You went out and bought that car for whatever amount, right? I've got a 2015 Equinox. One of the kids drives it. We bought that. Unfortunately, we had to buy they're twins. They turned 16 and wanted a car. And they saved up their money and they bought it together. Awesome job. But unfortunately, they turned 16 right at the peak of the used car market. It's down 50%.
Oof.
Now, granted, it's a few years older as well, but they're going to take a hit on it. Yeah. So to them, if they're watching at some point, these are at school right now, so I'm sure they're not watching now. All I want to say is, isn't adulting fun? Now you know why Dad's paranoid about everything.
But you know what's not on this chart as I look through is the buy now, pay later. I would love to see what that looks like.
And
really.
why isn't it there? Because it's not reported to credit agencies.
Exactly, right?
So now let's just say you've got Rich Brown. You've got $200,000 worth of buy now, pay later hanging out there, which a person, I mean, that's an extreme example, but if you went out and bought enough furniture, enough stuff off Amazon, enough Chipotle, a person could run up a substantial amount of buy now, pay later that when you go down to your local bank and say, hey, I need a home mortgage, they have no idea.
It's just crazy, man.
Okay. So it's completely hidden. Think about and I'm just thinking of this analogy now. Think about the risk that the banks were taking, financial institutions were taking leading up to the housing crisis with credit default swaps.
Yeah.
And the fear that happened with the housing crisis wasn't the housing market taking a big correction. The reason everything locked up, all the lending locked up, was one bank couldn't price another bank's risk because they didn't know what was hanging out there and counterparty risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's what locked it up. That's what really made the housing crisis into the great financial crisis, was when lending locked up. Well, now this is kind of the individual level of that with buy now, pay later for those folks that are caught in that, right?
They're going to have to bring this. They're going to have to make it a reportable.
Yeah, and it's moving that way. I don't know when for sure they're making that the case, but
this
you're
is
going
a
to see a
giant
lot of people
iceberg
take
out there, man.
Oh yeah, yep. And and here's the thing: in the end, if a bunch of people default on their buy now, pay laters, let Klarna, which is a Swedish company, if memory serves, and let Affirm, which I think is U.S. based, let them go bankrupt. Right? Because they're individual companies. These are not. They're basically bankers, right? But let them go bankrupt. Tough.
Yeah,
There's a reason I do not own stock in either one of those, even though they've done really, really well. I haven't looked at.
But who's not to say they're not doing what the MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and that is, I just package the buy now, pay later, and I sell it off. Sell off the debt to somebody. I mean, we don't know what they're doing. That's a dark market, man. It
absolutely is. Right. And that's a great point. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes and how they're financing, because somebody has to pay for the Chipotle when it shows up. Right.
Yeah. I guarantee they're
yeah.
being packaged and sold off.
Yeah. And there's other examples of this out there, much smaller. Look at Carvana. They don't make money selling cars. They're a finance company that happens to move vehicles from A to B and change ownership of them. They make their money on the loans.
Just like the American car market in the late 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
That worked out for them. They got their ass handed to them.
Well, and even leading up to the GFC, GMAC Finance made more money than GMC.
That's right.
And they got into the home mortgage.
Car was just a vehicle, no pun intended, to sell the loan.
Exactly, because it's part of the financialization of everything, which scares me deeply.
It should.
So, because everything's financialized now. So, all right. Let's talk about this. We alluded to this earlier with the fear grade index. This is the chart you see here is the fear grade index. And so let's not, how do I put this? Volatility is not risk. Something can be very volatile, but not be overall risky. See also Bitcoin, right? It goes up and down like crazy, but it's been over the last 15 years, the best performing asset out there. But can you live through
only lasted 4 years, Will. I'll look.
Say that again.
The tulip craze in the 1600s and Holland was 4 years.
Okay. All right.
To your point.
Thank you. Appreciate you looking that up. So now, but you got years of Bitcoin. I remember the best year I had in Bitcoin was up 1,300%. Okay. Worst year.
But it's only
was down.
The first Bitcoin was sold in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
There
Okay.
was 10,000 of them to buy one Domino's pizza, or I think it was Domino's or
Yeah.
Papa John's, what it doesn't matter. But that one purchase of 10,000 Bitcoins in today's dollars would be like $1.2 billion.
Yep.
I
Well,
mean,
and we can, and to your point, which is valid, but this is the problem with using a quote, I use air quotes around this, using a commodity to pay for a thing. Because I can make the same argument. I bought my first ounce of gold when it was 700 an ounce.
yeah.
If
But
I would
that
have
speaks to
used,
the volatility of what you were talking about. Bitcoin is volatile. 15
right,
years, it went from 10,000 of them to buy $40 worth of pizza
mm-hmm,
to 10,000 of them now will get you $1.2 billion.
mm-hmm, yep,
Volatile.
very volatile. So again, goes back to that position sizing we talked about, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk about stock market volatility, and let's bring in the emotions, financialization of everything, and good, bad, or indifferent. A lot more people in the market now than let's say 30 years ago. Let's go back that far. Okay.
Mhm.
So you will see here on this chart in April of this year, just, I mean, we're both old enough to remember 2 months ago, right?
Yeah.
Fear greed index bottomed at 3.
Oof.
Okay. Let's put that in perspective. It bottomed at 12 in September 2008, and that was right after Lehman failed. Do you think that was a worse time overall
Man,
than,
I don't remember it being at 3. Whoa.
yeah, it got down to 3 just a few months ago. And I'll be perfectly honest, I bought with both hands because when it
Did you
gets
really?
that far out, oh yeah. And I got leverage on, yeah. In my trading account, I was up 14% that month.
Wow.
Which really wasn't even all that great. I didn't go as hog wild as I should have. So, so was last month really worse than right before Lehman or
Obviously
right after
not.
Lehman failed, right?
Well, there's
But
something that scared the shit out of somebody.
but in fairness though, Trump changed the rules of the game with the tariffs,
Mhm.
right? And that scared the market. But then in I don't know, I'll just make the observation, retail kept buying that dip. Retail investors, individuals kept buying that dip. Institutions did not.
Mhm.
Okay. Institutional investors, and apparently I need to spell institutional a little better at the bottom. Sorry, guys. Illinois Public School Education. And for whatever reason, on my PowerPoint, spell check doesn't work. So institutional investors did not buy that dip. So they're playing catch up right now.
I find it interesting you always blame the public schools and you never blame where you got your undergrad. I think that's hilarious.
I just concentrated on flying there. So hedge funds also, not only did they not buy this dip, they went more short.
Hmm.
Okay. They thought the market was going to go down even more. So you've got both of those factors inside the market playing catch up right now. Hence the quick comeback to the tariff announcement. And now we're probably not this morning because I saw the pre-market was down because of the Moody's thing, which we're going to get to in a moment. We're basically back to break even on the year. So for all this volatility, if somebody would have conked you over the head in, I don't know what, early March, and you woke up today, you'd be like, yeah, we're about even.
Right.
Right.
Having never known what happened in April the 8th.
Exactly. So individual investors kept piling in buying the dip. The overall individual investor has been conditioned to keep buying the dip. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to come back to bite some people at some point whenever this
That's what I'm
downturn
saying.
happens. If you can go back to the previous one there, brother.
Yeah. It works till it don't.
Exactly. And then the last one is passive investing, which after we do this melt up series, I want to dig into passive investing. I've brought that up a few times and I keep forgetting to do it. Passive investing is when you buy your S&P 500 fund or your NASDAQ fund.
Mm-hmm.
And then that fund goes out and buys individual stocks. And that's actually skewing the market quite a bit versus the old days of stock picking, where we would go buy NVIDIA or we'd buy John Deere, which has done awesome since the tariffs came in because everybody's assuming things are going to come back to the U.S. Industrials have been doing great.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if we look back in previous times, especially in the 70s, the overall market was flat in the 70s. But if you could pick the right companies, you did just fine. So I think that's generally where we're headed back to. which is going to upset a lot of people's apple carts because suddenly good investment advisors, good research, valuations are going to matter again. Versus like a pets.com, which is an extreme example, but everybody knows what that means. So, but a lot of this volatility that we're talking about, I mean, let's face it, it got lower here than it did at the depths of the GFC. But there's a lot more retail money out there too, right?
Yeah.
And let's face it, most retail investors run with the herd. Now, they bought this dip. Let's talk about how and why we've been conditioned to buy the dip. Because what's happened every time is money printing.
Right.
And we talked about it some last week. Perfect timing, brother. So the largest threat to the system is we the people.
Yep.
Now we can go back to all those causes on those previous slides, but at the end, it's we the people and our emotions and the mindset of the people. Because what happened, on the left, you got J-Dog there, money printer go burr, and then you got Homer, the money's falling from the sky. So you start spending money. So the people have been conditioned to let this is what happens, right? And then things recover. So all you have to do is stay the course. Well, at some point, I mean, let's face it, right now, this national debt is unsustainable at these interest rates. The important part there is at these interest rates, because we don't pay down the national debt, right? All we do is service that debt. So at these interest rates, can't be sustained. Let me ask you a personal question right here, just between the two of us. Nobody else is listening.
Nobody's listening.
Nobody else is listening. Could you afford a $4 million mortgage if you just had to service the interest on that, brother?
Hell no.
Sure, you could if it was zero.
Good point.
Right? Yeah, now, make that $36 trillion. Can you afford to service that debt? Sure, you can if the interest is zero. Right? That's the key to everything right now. They got to get the national debt service down. And that's what Trump's focusing on. Now,
can I pause right there real quick? Because I'm going to go back to the GFC 2007. When I moved to Parris Island in 2006, so it's Beaufort, South Carolina. It's a low country. They got these old antebellum mansions and stuff there. And I'm like anybody. I want to put my family in the best place I can, right? And all these guys are like, yeah, bro, here's what you need to do. Come down here and get an interest-only loan. So you'll never own it. You just pay the interest, and then you bounce in 3 years, sell it, and make a fortune kind of thing. And that's what these guys coming from California were doing. And I mean, but that's the kind of drug that you get caught up in when you start thinking that way. And it's a false god, man.
It is. But here's what I'm going to, and you're absolutely right. I'm not advocating going there. I will not go there. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's the blind faith of that, right?
Yes.
That's the fear, greed, right? That's the greed side of that, right? And it works, as you said, it works till it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
But did they really sit and watch the market and see what was happening? That's the key to it, right? And did they understand the market? Whatever that market is, whether you want to talk about Bitcoin, the housing market, the stock market, do they just go, it always works?
Yeah.
Right. And let's face it, the housing market worked because of the money printing and loose lending standards that came in after the .com bubble.
Right.
That's why the housing market worked up until it didn't, because people just kept getting greedier and greedier. And you saw these things happen. Same thing will happen again at some point. We don't know which one of those threats or a different one could cause this. But the point I'm making with this one is there will be, with this show, is there will be a downturn. It's going to happen. Let's look at the history, say in the last 30, 40 years of how that's responded to. How does the federal government, how do they respond to that? Well, you got J-Dog. He says his press conference might as well just be a display of the printing press, right? You've got Congress. They've now learned that no matter what the Fed does, as long as somebody will borrow it from us, they can create their own stimulus. That's what happened.
We'll borrow it from ourselves if nobody shows up.
Exactly. Well, and when they borrow from themselves, they borrow from the Fed, who creates it out of nothing, right? And the if as long as somebody shows up to borrow it, the Congress has learned it doesn't matter what the Fed does, right? Because
Yep.
we had those two institutions at odds.
Hmm.
The Fed was trying to tighten, and the government just kept spending like crazy. And people kept buying the debt because the interest rate, the yield on those bonds was high enough to get them to do that, right? You
Yep.
know, so we can be critical of it, but if I told you right now, Rich, I got an investment for you, guaranteed, 100% guaranteed payout. You're gonna make 45% in 10 years.
I'm in. Where do I give you my money?
It's a 10-year treasury bond.
45%.
4.5%, right? And without compounding, it's
Oh, I thought
45%,
you
right?
said 45%, 4.5%. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
well, it's a 10-year bond though.
No.
So you're gonna make 4.5% a year for 10 years.
All right. I'll take
So
it.
even without compounding, right?
Hmm.
So you're gonna make that, right? So as an institutional investor somewhere, well, yeah, I'll lock that in. And if the economy gets bad, they're going to lower interest rates, which increases the price of the bond. So I can sell the bond early and make money on that,
Hmm.
right? And we know they have to decrease rates at some point. It's going to happen. Now that let's dovetail that into the Moody's thing, because that kind of works in there. So Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit. Here it was down to from AAA plus down to AAA or AAA down to whatever. It went down a notch. Okay,
Hmm.
it's a nothing burger.
Hmm.
Because if memory serves, I stand by to be correct on this because I forgot to get up a few minutes early and research this morning. I believe S&P and Fitch have already downgraded us to that. So Moody's is just playing catch up, like a year and a half later or whatever it's been. Okay, so it when S&P and Fitch each downgraded us, the market was down 1.5–2% the next day, and I forget the period of time. I'm going to say 3 months later ish, we were up 10%. It's a nothing burger.
Hmm.
Because where else is anybody going to go if they want guaranteed payout? Nowhere.
Nowhere.
So this is a nothing burger. As long as people keep buying the debt, whatever. And they're going to keep buying the debt because where else are you going to put your money that you need a guaranteed return of your capital at? You're going to buy Chinese bonds, Pakistani bonds, euros, euro bonds. I mean, yeah, it just doesn't matter. So, so this shell game will keep going in the big parlance of the whole system falling apart. It's going to keep going for a long time until something else comes along to replace the U.S. dollar, and that's going to be a long time out.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, it
What
depends what you mean by a long time.
I'm going to say we'll both be dead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you're right, brother.
Yeah, and here's the why. Now I stand by to be corrected on that, but somebody's gonna have to come in and run a true responsible system that has enough of it, that has a
Let me
robust legal system to back it up.
let me give you a potential.
Okay.
We lose a kinetic near peer war with China,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
where are you going to put your money?
True. Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah, and that is on a 5-year horizon. So
True. That is
not to
very true.
be
That's a good point.
negative, but anytime I hear things like that, I'm like, okay. Well,
Yep. So I found this chart from Real Investment Advice. Honestly, guys, I can go back and research this. So I'm taking this at face value here. Government interventions versus cumulative economic growth. So you got real GDP here, and real meaning adjusted for inflation, and government interventions in billions of dollars. And we can go back to Q4 2008 rather.
mhm.
And this is when we started with TARP, the whole $700 billion, which seems like nothing now. And it starts just going up and up and up. And you can see that even from 2014, that this is cumulative. So from 2014 to the start of COVID, there really wasn't any more intervention. So your flat line there doesn't mean it was just zero during that period of time.
Mhm.
Okay. And then, of course, it took off afterwards. But look at your GDP, your real GDP, cumulative net change from 2009 to present, your bar graph down low there. It took all that intervention. I mean, look from Q4 08 to 2012. Took all that intervention to bring us from negative in 08 up to a very low amount of growth, right?
Mhm.
And then look what happened between Q4 of 18, 19, somewhere in there
Mhm.
to now. We're just getting back to where we were, and look at all the money that got spent to make that happen. So this goes back to our discussion last week that each round of stimulus has less effect.
Yeah,
And by each round,
absolutely.
I'm going back to the dot-com bubble. Okay.
Yes.
So each round has less effect. And we can see that since COVID, right? The first couple of rounds of stimmy, huge effect. People spent money like crazy, and each one became a little less and less, right? So
We talked about this, man, but did they
mhm,
really spend money like crazy or did they pay down debt?
they did both.
Yeah.
They did both. It was about
In
50
in
50.
and I was gonna say in relatively equal measure.
Yes, it was about 50 50.
It
But
wasn't what they
then,
wanted. They wanted up as close to 100% spending as they could, and they got 50% of it.
right. So that's also why we go from to the point you brought up earlier about how the money went to the banks during the GFC,
Mm.
right? And then the banks were told, "Hey, loan this money out," and they went, "No, there's no good risks out there right now." So they put the money in the stock market. Stock market took off
Yeah.
before the economy recovered, well
Mhm.
before. Okay, so then they went. That's where the Fed learned. No, no, no. We got to figure out a way to get this straight to the people. Hence the stimulus
Mhm.
that went straight to the people, and then they got a 50% in straight into the economy through spending.
Mhm.
And you go back to GFC, 100% of it went to the banks, 50% got loaned out. That took time, right? So the Fed is learning over time you have to go straight to the people if you
Mhm.
want that effect.
So you
Now,
think that in the future we'll see more of the helicopter money and less
mhm,
QE or a little bit of both?
you're gonna see both.
Mm.
You're gonna some of it will go to the banks because credit runs everything, and loans are credit.
Yeah.
So you want to go buy a house, they can't. Okay, in a reasonable world, they can't send out enough stimmy for us to pay cash for a house.
Mhm.
Okay. But they can send enough out to the banks to get that part of the market going again. Right.
Mhm.
So there's the Fed has learned you got to go straight to the people with this stuff. Now,
Mhm.
will they add strings next time? Well, maybe, you know. Um, you
Depending who the
know,
next Fed chair is and what he's gonna do, and it's
yeah.
gonna be Trump's appointment next year, by the way.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Next May, and they're interviewing for it officially this summer, I believe, starting in August. And they're pre-interviewing through interviews right now, so it's worth taking the time. If you see something on YouTube or wherever CNBC with current Federal Reserve board member, governor, or whatever, yeah, watch that. They're interviewing for that right now,
Can they
and
be people
while they're
outside of that, or they have to be a former,
nope,
uh,
they
board
can be anybody.
member? Okay.
Matter of fact, right, wrong, or indifferent, Jerome Powell he doesn't even have a degree in economy,
Mm.
as an economist. He's a lawyer who went to private
Mhm.
equity. Um, so yeah, he can point you, me, whoever.
Tony says I saw a weird shell formation on the beach yesterday. It said 86 the Fed. I think I wrote that, Tony. But yeah, that's an interesting what Comey did, and I loved seeing him getting picked up by the Secret Service and carted off for questioning. That's exactly what needs to happen. You say
Yep.
stupid crap like that.
Yeah, that's completely unacceptable. So,
Yeah.
the point of this chart, guys, is it's just going to take more and more and more, and the only way they can do another round of stimulus or anything in the future is interest rates have to come down, and then if inflation's already that if we have a bad enough downturn, interest rates will go down and inflation will go down. And we had 2 quarters of deflation after the GFC.
Can I
That
ask you a
scared the
question?
heck out of the Fed. Yeah, go for it.
Well, okay, we talk about money printing, but as we know, we are living in this modern monetary theory
Mhm.
experiment, whatever you want to call it. So you print more money, you got to pull it out of the system, or the value of the dollar just continues to go down. So, but as we know, you pull it out via taxation. I guess what I'm getting at is Trump is talking about I want to get rid of the IRS and make it a
Mhm.
external revenue service kind of thing. How does that pull money out, or is that a whole nother show in and
Well,
of itself?
let's go bigger picture on that. Okay, so for years we printed money and didn't get inflation, right?
Hmm.
For decades, right? Well, that's because we exported those excess dollars. They weren't
Hmm.
caught inside the USA system. We exported them mainly to China.
Mm,
Our national debt funded Chinese economic growth.
good point.
Okay. So we exported all that. The
Yep.
tariffs, if you want to look at it another way, we're going to import that money.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. That's the way I'm envisioning it. Now I know the consumer pays it in the end. I get all that. Okay. And that's something we have as Americans will have to balance out, do income taxes go to zero and we pay tariffs and that, does all those things. But this is a regime change because let's face it, this system no longer works for America. That's why we have $36 trillion in debt. Because this
Yeah.
system, it worked for quite a while. And you think about, we looked at that chart with all the STEMI stuff. But if you think
Mhm.
about, you go back to whatever, the 80s, the 90s, when all this excess money printing was happening and we exported all that, that worked really good,
Yeah.
right? Think about the economic growth during that period.
Oh,
It was
sure.
gargantuan because our costs were going down.
But
The
it's
national debt,
unsustainable.
exact in the long term, it's unsustainable. So I was thinking about this morning. Think of a personal family budget. Let's just say their family budget is $100,000 a year
Mhm.
after taxes. Okay. But mom and dad are kicking in 20 a year to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Well, that 20 year when they're making 80 after taxes, the mom and dad kick in that 20 and give it to them. Just assume no taxes on anything here, just to make it easy.
Mhm.
Well, that's 25% stimulus, if you will, right?
Mhm.
But now let's say the kids get some raises and they're making, $160,000 a year. Well, to keep that the same, mom and dad have to give them 40, right? Well, eventually mom and dad run out of money or desire to give them money.
Right.
That's our system.
Mhm.
And it's still working right now marginally, but at these interest rates, it cannot work long term.
Mhm.
So, how do you get interest rates to zero? I'll get back on my soapbox. You got to have bad times. You have to have a reason to go to zero. And we'd all love to go back and be able to, refinance our houses at 2.75 again and all those sorts of things. You're just not going to like what it takes to get there.
But all the people that talk mad crap about our generation, man, when you and I bought our first home, probably in the 90s is when I bought
Mhm.
mine, 95. It was a 7.75 or
Mhm.
7.5, whatever it was. And I was
Mhm.
happy to get that, you know.
Yes.
I was one of the lucky guys that got a 7.7. So we've been through
Mhm.
some of it. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
equating myself to like my friend Michael Gentili, who's probably buying homes in the late 70s and getting crucified. But yeah, the heady days of a 2.75, is it going to come back around again? Well, I don't know. What do you think?
If times get bad enough, because
Hmm.
what did it take to get there last time?
Right.
They had to shut the economy down, right? That's what it took. So this is part of the whole financialization of everything. So if we look at um, if we look at, yes, you paid seven something, I paid seven something. I bought my first place in '98. Um, you look at that and go, wow, that was a good deal back then. But it's all relative because a few
Yes.
years before that, I'm making this up, guys. So the actual, a few years before that, it was 9%, right?
Exactly. Right.
But what did home prices do during this period of time too? I mean, I bought my first place; it was a duplex,
Hmm.
and it was $78,000 if I remember right. It was a
Hmm.
little 3-bed upstairs, 3-bed downstairs duplex for 78,000. That same place, because I went and looked at it, I thought about buying it back. It would have been kind of cool to buy it back after all
Hmm.
these years. I went and looked at it; it sold for 170,000
When?
at 7%, just like within the last 3 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this is the younger generation. Honestly, they're getting whacked on both sides right
They
now.
are.
It's a higher interest rate compared to a few years ago, and the prices are through the roof. Up here, I'm in central Wisconsin, guys. Our home prices aren't going down anytime soon because nobody's building up here.
Mhm.
And if they're building, it's 500,000 plus. The starter homes are off the market like that.
Yeah.
And they go, you better come in over the asking price, and it's going to be a bidding war. Yeah, it's just the market up here. Florida, totally different. But that's supply and demand. And that's a whole nother show with Florida. But the point is that to circle back to your point and these things, it's all the relationship of these numbers, and then not only on a micro level for that house that a family, young family, whatever is looking at, all the way up to the relationship between the national debt and the interest rate and what's serviceable and what can be done. It's all that interplay, but people get caught up on raw numbers because it's easy for all of us to understand, right?
Right.
And it is. So,
but it's the dynamic interplay. And this is the one where I don't know anything about this Basel. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing what is this.
I learned some stuff on this. So Mark, thank you for bringing it up and having a discussion about this here. So Basel One was in 1998, response to the Latin American debt crisis. And that was American banks lending a whole bunch of money to Latin American countries who had no business getting all that money. That's a whole nother ball of wax down there, that whole time period. So they came up with these banking rules. So the Basel rules are just rules for the banks. Okay. Mm-hmm. Basel II was in 2004, response to the dot-com bubble crash. And Basel III came about after the housing crisis. You will note that each Basel is preceded by a crisis of some sort involving the banks. Okay. So at some point there will be a Basel IV. Who knows when, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to the next one there, brother, let's dig into a little bit of, so here's the basics of the Basel III rules. Okay. It applies to banks with more than $100 billion in assets. There's 37 of those banks in the USA. Think of your big banks. That's them. Okay. The final changes, so everything comes in stages here with the Basel rules. The final changes are called the Basel III Endgame, just the final parts of it, okay? Got delayed by COVID because they didn't want to restrict the banks in any way during that period of time. The Endgame is set to take effect July 1st of this year. There's a ton of blah, blah, blah out there on this, guys. But here's the real upshot of it. The banks have to hold more reserves. Okay. And so the idea of holding the more reserves is that if there's a crisis, they have reserves to draw on to let the bank get through that so that they don't have to be bailed out. That's the upshot of it. Okay. You've got different
right here. Does it say 8%? Is that the
yes? So the total reserves tier 1 plus tier 2, which we'll talk about here, is 8% of their reserves have to be 8% of what they loaned out.
But okay. I thought, wait a minute, because I thought it was more than that for just common fractional reserve banking was like 15%. Did I make that number up out of my?
The number traditionally is 10%, but things kind of changed.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got two different tiers of reserves that count towards this total reserves of 8%. You got tier 1 reserves are cash and like cash reserves, very liquid. Okay. You got tier 2 reserves, and these are stable but less liquid than tier 1. So this would be your tier 1 would be cash. I couldn't find a definitive list of this, but it's I'm cash for sure. I'm guessing treasury bills and bonds because those are as good as cash because they're going to get their money out of those. And as you will see, looking at the bottom one there, gold has recently become a tier 1 asset.
Shocker.
Okay. Well, that brings about some problems, though.
What?
Well, because gold price fluctuates, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Not much, but it does.
Well, actually, I'm going to argue that it went up 30% plus last year.
Yeah, but this is a relatively unprecedented run for gold.
Agree, but let's say that corrects back down 30%.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is if gold corrects down that far, chances are the rest of the economy is booming and people don't want that safe haven.
The dollar's
So the
through
banks will be
roof.
fine.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but my point being that gold is not that, gold is not the stable thing it used to be. It's starting to get more volatile as well
Mhm.
because people rush to it because it started going and it's been, financialized. I can go
Yep.
buy an ETF with gold, right? And I do.
Yep.
Okay.
Gold's been
Now,
financialized longer than anything. We'd have to go back to seashells to when we were
well,
trading those.
and when I say financialized, I mean you can manipulate it, get derivatives of it, right?
I got you. Okay.
So,
Fair
so when
enough.
I say financialized, I don't mean it's like money. I mean it's I can go buy options on GLD, which is the ETF for gold, and
Okay.
so that when I say financialization, I mean it's fully within all these sub parts of the market.
I'll
Okay,
buy that.
so when gold went from a tier 3 asset, and a
Mhm.
tier 3 asset, you could put 50% of the market value down as your reserve. So if you had
Mhm.
$1 billion in gold when it was a tier 3 asset, you could only put it down as a $500 million asset on your books. Now you get the full amount. So the
Okay.
tier 1, you get the full amount. That's why I'm adding treasury bills and bonds into the tier 1.
Who's
I
making
could
these
be
rules? The IMF? Where is this coming from?
this came from the Bank of International Settlements. That is the central bank of central banks.
Okay.
Okay. Um, So tier 2 reserves, they're stable but less liquid. Also undisclosed reserves and subordinated debt instruments. What is a subordinated debt
No.
instrument?
I
Yeah,
hope you
you
tell me.
you do know what it is.
What?
It's like a credit default swap.
Oh no.
So now it's not a credit default swap, but it's a subordinated debt instrument. So the only analogy I could think of for this, and if somebody's got a better one, I'm all ears, but it'd be like a second mortgage.
Hmm.
Because there's somebody else in front of you. You're subordinate to them.
Mhm.
Okay. Now the tier 2s, they don't get the full. If we straight line it, they'll get 75% of that. I couldn't find the number they get for tier 2 reserves, but it's something stable, but not as good as cash, T bills, or gold. Make sense?
Yes.
So the banks, you can find interviews out there if you're having trouble sleeping, you can watch these interviews with like Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, complaining about the Basel III rules, throwing a fit. Okay. Because the banks don't want to hold more reserves. They don't make
Yeah.
money off reserves.
No.
They want to loan the money out. They want to get it out there. But this is if you go to the next slide, brother, this is the trade-off with being a GSIB. You want guaranteed bailouts, you do the Basel III.
Exactly. I got you. That makes
Okay.
sense.
So the
That's
Basel
the
III.
whiff 'em right there.
Yep, exactly. So this was agreed upon in 2017. It increased their tier 1 capital requirements, the reserves. They must hold the capital buffers to weather financial storms. Okay.
Mhm.
So we can read through these. You got the capital conservation buffer, which is 2.5% of risk weighted assets. So let's talk about risk weighted assets. If you've got $1 million loan out to Jim, and Jim's really stable, got a good job, good debt to income ratios. Okay. That's a low risk weighted asset. If you got $1 million loan out to Billy Joe Jim Bob, who really shouldn't have that and has terrible numbers that we just talked about there a second ago, he would have a higher risk weighted loan. So this 2.5% is a moving target based on the risk that's out there. Okay. CCB, countercyclical capital buffer, must hold additional capital during times of excessive credit growth. So if the bank is loaning out a lot of money really fast, think 2005, 2006, then they have to hold more reserves because they're increasing their risk very rapidly. So think of it, the way I'm thinking about this is a way to kind of slow the bank down a little bit.
Okay.
Because if suddenly their credit starts to, in other words, the amount of credit they're extending out there really grows rapidly, then they have to hold more reserves and that'll hold them back a little bit. It also increases the buffer along with the credit growth. Okay. And then there's a GSIB surcharge. Globally, systemically important bank, they must hold a capital buffer of 1 to 3.5% of risk-weighted assets in reserve. It's the same as the other one with the risk-weighted assets. But you want to be a GSIB and get a guaranteed bailout, you got to hold a little more in reserve because that decreases the risk to the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So that they're better able to weather another housing crisis or whatever it ends up being this time around. But it's the same sort of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Basel III. And the final rules are supposed to come in July. The banks are throwing a fit. And it's the big banks, and they got a lot of money. They're throwing a lot of money at lobbying, media campaigns. JP Morgan, CEO, Jamie Dimon's out there talking about it. So is Bank of America and everybody else.
I want to get a couple comments here. You know, Guile says, can the U.S. pay that $36 billion debt? I can't believe the greatest nation in the world would be in debt. Yeah. And then, well, again, it goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton, you know, and he was creating this. He's like, hey, you want a little bit of debt. You need a little bit of debt. And it hurts my head to think about it, but he's got a compelling point, and here we are. But Ted says, Will and Rich are doing an excellent job sharing insights. Remember the foundation, the cycle. USA and hence the world is in a crisis stage. Evidence seems overwhelming. And then Ted also says, Guile, U.S. is in denial, no matter words spoken. Mark says, thank you, Will. This is the best explanation of Basel III that I have received. And even a dummy, a cymbal banging monkey like your old pal Rich Brown can understand. So thank you so much for breaking this down. And listen, to the four folks that have stayed with us for an hour and a half, listen, this is phenomenal information because it's easy. You and I and a lot of folks watching, it's you know, I'm going to go to the gym here in a minute, and we're going to go shooting. We're doing all this fun stuff, maybe get on the mats this week. But it doesn't mean anything if I lose my home and my livelihood and we're, you know, so this is part of your survival, right here.
Absolutely. Yep. And I want to go back to the last part of Ted's comment there. The world is in a crisis stage. Evidence seems overwhelming. And I couldn't agree more with Ted's assessment there. But the way to weather a crisis is be prepared for it. Whether it's that going to the gym, getting on the mats, going shooting, that's preparing to weather that crisis. Well, there's another crisis coming too. And just like the first one, you don't know when it's going to happen, but we can look at indicators. Same way you can look at that indicator when you're down at the local gas station and some scurvy looking guy starts walking up to you, right? There's indicators there, right? Yep. There's indicators out here on this too, but I'll be candid with you. I don't care if you listen to Team Blue media or Team Red media, you're not going to hear them.
Right.
So,
because everybody has a vested incentive of keeping the status quo.
Exactly right.
And there's just too many things going on that, you know, with whether it's the tariffs that are going to go on, JDOG getting replaced here in the next 12 months or so. I mean, that could go any different way. You know, you got midterms coming up, budget issues going on, trying to end the war in Gaza or the war, you know, president's talking to Putin today. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yep,
China is feeling the effects. I mean, man, there's a whole constellation of variables at play right now that could take us into unknown territory.
Absolutely. And here's one on the good news, bad news scale, right? So I was talking with a friend who's also very into stock market finance, all that sort of stuff. And he said, you know, it's not 1970 anymore. We're a service economy. We're a technology economy. We're not an industrial economy, and it's better because it's more stable. And my point was, I had 2 points with that. One is, why can't we be both?
Right.
That's number one. And number two is, are we really a more stable economy because we've moved to technology and services, or are we more stable because every time there's a downturn, there's enough money printing to make it go away?
That's it right there.
So it wasn't this, in my opinion, it's not going to services that made us more stable. It's that every time there's a downturn, they do something about it versus, let's think back. They tried to do stuff about previous downturns, but like in the 70s, they let it run its course. They let the economy correct back because a recession in the long term is a healthy thing. It gets rid of the excess.
Yes.
Look at our national debt. Look at the money printing. We don't get rid of excess anymore. We get more excess.
Yes.
Which, as we know, personal debt, you keep kicking that can down the road, it just hurts more. And that's where we're at. And to Giles' point, Can the U.S. pay back the? I wish it was 36 billion, brother. It's 36 trillion. I know you just mistyped there, or spell check. Gotcha. Can't believe the greatest nation in the world can be in debt. Well, we did it.
Yeah.
And globalization, if you go back, it was to fund globalization because we exported all the dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and it's exactly the way the system is meant to work, the globalization system. But the overall Federal Reserve, all that, it's based on constant devaluing of the dollar to grow an economy. That's the way the system's designed. And that's when we're going to get to the next part 3 next week, is how to protect yourself when these things happen. And it's something that I've just finally gotten through my thick skull in maybe the last year. Because
speaking of getting through our thick skulls, Will, and to Giles' Freudian slip there between billion and trillion, every now and then to me it's helpful to refresh our memory the differences in these things. And we'll look at it in seconds. In 11 and a half days is a million seconds. So by the time you're born, 11 and a half days later, you will celebrate your millionth second on this planet. 11 and a half days. You won't hit a billion seconds until you're almost 33 years old. And then you won't hit a trillion seconds until you're 33,000 years old. So million, billion, trillion, they start to sound the same to us lay people who aren't million, billion, trillionaires. If you're a thousandaire like me,
Oh, actually, you're a trillionaire, brother. So am I.
That's true for Zimbabwe, and that's what can happen when you
right
screw
here
up your.
Oh, I can't get it to focus in with this. Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
And that's what happens with poor monetary policy. We can all be trillionaires and you'll be starving to death. And that's one of the interesting ones from that era. There was all these people holding signs saying starving billionaire. So be careful what you wish for. But anyway, yeah
for sure.
We need to think about these things. What's this quote here?
I don't know where I ran across this at, but I love it. The most valuable, let me try English this time. The most valuable math you can learn is how to calculate the future cost of your current decisions.
Yes.
And, gosh, I mean, I learned that in my 20s, right? Credit card debt right here, this guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So then the bank forced me to learn said math, right? But boy, look at our country. We're not learning that math.
But this right here is so important, and sadly, it's beyond the grasp of 50% of Americans. And hear me out for a second. The mean IQ in the United States, and probably just the United States, is 100. So that means 50% of everybody has an IQ less than 100. And what does an IQ do? It enables you to project things into the future, your current status into a future status. Well, if you're a person with, like 15% of the Americans have an IQ of less than 85. 15% of 340 million, bullshit. 15% of 50% of 340 million is tens of millions of people that have an IQ of under 85. Those are the people that will never be able to get this, and they will struggle repeatedly just because it's beyond their intellectual grasp. And of course, we don't talk about what to do with those folks. They just get destroyed.
Yes.
The more complex the problem becomes, the worse the outcome for those folks. And Giles says, of course, I meant trillion. Sorry. No worries, brother.
Yeah.
This is, everybody screws it up.
Yeah. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah,
it's hard.
Maturity and foresight.
Yeah. Well, and let's take this a step further. I'm going to challenge you, me, everybody. What's the cost of your current decisions? I'll skip that workout today. What's the future cost of that? Right. And let's face it, and I'm not throwing stones at anybody on this. And there's a gajillion different reasons why these things happen. Right. But if you look at our population, morbid obesity is normalized, right?
Big time.
And I refer to that as slow motion suicide by fork.
Yeah.
But that's what's the cost of eating that cheesecake now, right? What's the cost of skipping that workout? Go down the line, because it takes years and people don't put it together. The same way, when all that money printing happened during COVID, and we were talking about it, brother, what did we say? Inflation's coming.
Yeah.
Inflation's coming. And I had people, friends, family members, 6 months later be like, well, see, no inflation. Like, just wait. Just wait.
And when it did start to come, what did they tell us, Will?
Oh, it was something else, right?
It's transitory.
Yeah,
Be
this
gone
was
in no
transitory.
time.
But I mean, the by then, because it's such a lag, and these lags are variable, right? So the lag it takes for money printing to show up inflation is
Mhm.
different than the lag it takes for something else to happen. So they're
Mhm.
long and variable, and therefore people don't put it together.
Yeah.
Right. And a whole bunch of us were screaming about it, right? During all that money print. It's coming. Here comes the inflation, right? Well, we're going to dig into some of this next week and how you can protect your family by taking certain actions.
Well, thank you
Because
so much.
this has all been the setup for that for
Yeah,
next
thank
week's
you
show.
so much, man. This series, the melt up series, this is part 2, the downturn. We got 2 more to go in the series, and I'm learning something every single week. So thank you so much,
Awesome.
Will, for all you do
Awesome.
here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I enjoy doing it. Hope we pass on some useful information. Next week we're going to talk about when the next downturn happens, what are they going to do? What are likely outcomes, right? And what can we do to prepare ourselves to better provide for our families? There's only one direction this is going, guys. I don't see a way. History tells us, right?
Mhm.
There's only one direction it's going. We're going to talk about that next week and how you can protect yourselves and your nest egg. Grow your pile, as they say in the financial world.
So with that, folks, the fight is coming, right, Will?
Yes, sir. Be ready.